They laughed on a Thursday afternoon in the middle of a boardroom that smelled of imported leather and old money, and the specific expensive cologne of men who had never once questioned whether they deserved to be in the room they were standing in. I heard the laughter from the corridor. I was not in the room. I had not been invited into the room. I had been asked to wait outside, in the corridor with the high ceilings and the framed photographs of Lagos's skyline at different decades, while the people inside discussed something that had everything to do with me, and nothing to do with my opinion on the matter. I sat in one of the chairs along the wall, the chairs that existed for people who were waiting to be called, not for people who were expected, and I listened to the laughter move through the closed door like something physical. I knew what the laughter was about. I had known for 3 days that this meeting was coming, and I had known for 3 days what would be in it. Because the Lagos business community is large enough to seem like a city and small enough to function like a neighborhood, and information travels through it the way information travels through any neighborhood. Fast, incomplete, and inevitable. My name is Damilola Adeyemi. I was 37 years old. I ran a workshop in Surulere, on a street that had been my father's street before it became mine, in a building that smelled permanently of engine oil and the particular metal-warm air of a space where things were being fixed. I had 12 employees, a modest fleet maintenance contract with 3 mid-sized companies, and a reputation in the 6 neighborhoods that mattered to me for doing work that was clean and honest and did not require following up. The woman in the room was Folic Savage Williams, 52 years old, founder and CEO of Savage Williams Capital, one of the most significant private equity firms in Nigeria. A woman whose name appeared on the boards of 7 companies, 2 hospitals, and a university endowment. A woman who had been photographed with 3 different heads of state, who had testified before the National Assembly on financial reform, who had been described in a profile in a business magazine as possessing a quality of strategic intelligence that was, in the writer's words, almost unsettling in its precision. She was also the woman who had been visiting my workshop on Saturdays for 6 months. Not for the fleet contract, though the contract was real and the work was honest. For the conversations, for the kelewele from the cart down the road, for the particular quality of a Saturday morning in Surulere that had nothing to do with boardrooms or investment strategies or the specific performance that wealth required of people who possessed it publicly. She came for the ordinary things. And I had come to understand, over 6 months of ordinary Saturdays, that she had been starving for the ordinary things the way a person starves for water when everything available to them is expensive and tasteless and served in crystal glasses. The laughter subsided behind the closed door. Then a voice, male, confident, the voice of someone who had been using a boardroom as a natural habitat since before I was born, said something I couldn't fully hear. Then more laughter. I looked at the Lagos skyline in the photograph on the wall across from me. The island in the 90s. Less glass, more sky. The city before it knew what it was becoming. I thought about what my father used to say when I was frustrated with a repair that wasn't going the way I expected. The engine doesn't care about your feelings, Dami. It only responds to what you actually do. I sat with that, and I waited. But what I didn't know yet, what none of us knew, was that the laughter in that room was going to cost every person producing it something they were not prepared to lose. If you have ever sat outside a room while people inside it decided your worth, stay with me, because this story is for you. I had met Folic Savage Williams 8 months before that Thursday corridor, and the meeting had been the specific kind of accident that is only an accident in the sense that nobody planned it. The kind that, looked at afterward, seems to have been arranged by something more patient and more purposeful than coincidence. Her driver had called my workshop number at 6:45 in the morning, a time when I was already in the pit under a delivery truck, which was where I was at 6:45 most mornings, and had explained, with the compressed urgency of someone managing a situation on behalf of someone important, that the principal vehicle had developed a fault on the Ozumba-Mbadiwe expressway and required immediate assistance. Immediate assistance on the Ozumba-Mbadiwe at 6:45 in the morning meant traffic that had not yet reached its full capacity but was already building, and a car stopped by the roadside in a position that was inconvenient and becoming more so by the minute. I sent my best mechanic, Kunle, because Kunle was faster than me on highway calls and because I had the delivery truck to finish. Kunle called me back 20 minutes later with the particular tone of someone who has arrived at a situation and assessed it and is now reporting accurately. "The fault is a cracked coolant pipe," he said. "Secondary line. I can patch it here and get the car moving, but the pipe needs full replacement today, or she'll have the same problem on the road tonight." "She?" I said. "The owner is here," Kunle said. "She didn't stay in the car." A pause. "She's standing next to me watching what I'm doing." I smiled slightly. "Tell her the pipe needs to come in today." "She wants to speak to the workshop owner," Kunle said. I climbed out of the pit. I called the number Kunle gave me. The voice that answered was exactly what I would have expected, and nothing like what I would have imagined. Direct and unhurried. A voice that had learned long ago that the fastest way to get accurate information was to ask for it without social decoration. "Folake Savage Williams," she said, by way of introduction, not performance. "Damilola Adeyemi," I said. "My mechanic tells me you have a cracked coolant pipe." "He's patching it now," she said. "He explained the repair clearly, and he's been working without stopping since he arrived. I appreciate competence." A pause. "He also said the pipe needs to be replaced today, or the problem recurs." "That's correct," I said. "Can you do it today?" "If the car comes in before noon," I said. "It will be there by 10, she said. She hung up. The car arrived at 9:53, which told me something about her relationship with stated times. I did the repair myself, a clean job, straightforward, done in 40 minutes. When the driver came to collect at 11:30, he handed me an envelope with payment that was exactly what I had quoted, and a handwritten note that said, "Good work. I'll be in touch about a fleet review." The fleet review became a contract. The contract brought her to my workshop the first time, not to supervise, but to understand. She sat across from me in my small office and asked questions about the workshop's methodology with the genuine curiosity of someone who had decided that the best information about how something worked was found at the place where the work actually happened. I answered everything directly. She came back the following week, and the week after. And somewhere in the third or fourth visit, the questions stopped being about the workshop and started being about everything else, and we were on the other side of the professional boundary before either of us had formally acknowledged crossing it. I understood what Folake was before I understood what we were to each other, and I want to be clear about the sequence because it mattered. She was not a mystery to me. I had looked her up after the first phone call, not obsessively, but with the specific practical curiosity of someone who had just entered into a business arrangement with a person and wanted to understand the context. What I found was public, extensive, and coherent. A woman who had built something significant over 25 years through a combination of intellectual rigor and personal discipline that was evident even in the way she was written about by people who admired her and by people who found her difficult. She had been married once. A man named Ade Williams, an architect 15 years ago, for 6 years. The divorce had been quiet in the specific way that divorces are quiet when both people are professional enough to keep the noise private. There were no children. There was no public narrative about why. She had one brother, Segan Savage, 48 years old, who ran the family's real estate interests with what appeared, from the outside, to be competence, and from the inside, as I would come to understand, to be a combination of genuine capability and a long-standing sense that his sister's success had arrived at his expense in ways that were not quantifiable, but were nonetheless real and persistent. She had a mother, Mama Savage, 74 years old, who lived in a house in Ikoyi that Folake had bought her, and who was, by all accounts, a woman of strong opinions about most things, and particularly strong opinions about the question of who was and was not appropriate for her daughter. I learned all of this gradually, not from research, but from the way Folake talked about her life on Saturday mornings in my workshop office, with Kelewele on the table between us and the sounds of Surulere moving through the walls. She talked about her family the way people talk about things they have organized their feelings about over many years, clearly, without excessive emotion, with the specific precision of someone who has done a great deal of internal work on a subject and has arrived at a place of honest understanding that is not the same thing as peace. She talked about Segun with a particular careful quality, the quality of someone describing a relationship that was both genuinely loving and structurally complicated. The love that exists between siblings who have grown up in the shadow of the same parents and arrived at adulthood with different inheritances from the experience. She talked about her mother with warmth that was genuine and complexity that was equally genuine. She did not for a long time talk about how any of them would respond to me. I did not ask. I had a sense that the answer was something she was building toward. Not avoiding, but sequencing the way she did everything. Finding the right moment for the right information, with the particular discipline of someone who had learned that premature disclosure was a form of waste. What I did not anticipate was that the moment would be chosen for us. Not by her, not by me, by Segun. Segun Savage arrived at my workshop on a Tuesday afternoon without an appointment, in a car that was expensive in the way of someone who has always had access to expensive things and has therefore never needed to choose between expensive and impressive. They are simply the same category. He was a large man, not heavy, but present in the physical way of someone who fills a room through posture rather than size. He was dressed in a way that was careful and deliberate, the way people dress when they want to look like they haven't thought about how they dress. He walked through the entrance of Asante Auto, the way certain kinds of men walk into spaces they have already decided are below them, not rudely, but with the specific ease of someone who has predetermined that nothing here will surprise them. I came out of the service bay wiping my hands. He looked at me. "Damilola Adeyemi," he said. Not a question. He had done research. "Yes," I said. "Can I help you?" "My name is Segun Savage," he said. "Folake's brother." I held his gaze. "I know who you are." Something moved in his face. Briefly. He had expected either recognition with deference or ignorance, and had received neither. "Then you know why I'm here," he said. "I'd prefer you tell me," I said. "I try not to assume." He looked around the workshop with the assessment I had seen before. The assessment that was not about understanding the space, but about locating oneself above it. He looked at the vehicles on the lifts, the organized tool wall, the parts inventory system my father had developed and that I had refined. He looked at Kunle and the two other mechanics working in the bays, who had both registered his arrival and were continuing to work with the focused indifference of people who have seen this kind of visit before. He looked back at me. "My sister has been coming here regularly," he said. "More regularly than any fleet maintenance contract requires." "Your sister sets her own schedule," I said. "She does," he agreed. "That has never been in question." He paused. "What is in question is the nature of the visits, and whether the situation is one that the family is aware of and has had the opportunity to consider." "Has your sister asked for the family's consideration?" I said. His jaw tightened. Slightly. The specific tightening of someone who has been asked a question that contains its own answer and doesn't like the answer. "My sister is a public figure," he said carefully. "Her decisions, personal and professional, exist in a context that extends beyond her individual preferences. The family's name, the company's reputation, the board's confidence in her judgment." He paused. "These are not small things." "No," I said, "and they're not. Then you understand, he said, that a relationship between someone of her stature and someone of your... He paused. He was choosing his next word with the particular care of someone who wants to deliver a specific meaning without using the specific word that delivers it. Your circumstances, he finished, raises questions. I looked at him. I thought about my father's tools on the wall behind me. I thought about 12 employees whose livelihoods depended on the work being done consistently and honestly. I thought about Folake on a Saturday morning, eating kelewele from a plastic plate, laughing at something I had said about the city, with the specific unguarded quality of someone who had left their performance at the gate. What questions? I said. He looked at me with the expression of someone who has expected this question and has prepared for it. Questions about intention, he said, about what a man in your position stands to gain from a relationship with a woman in hers. The workshop sounds continued around us, metal on metal, a radio somewhere low, the particular hum of a space where work was being done and would continue to be done regardless of whatever was happening in my office. I said, Your sister is a grown woman who has built one of the most significant private equity firms in this country. She is not naive, she is not easily confused, and she is not here because I pursued her. I held his gaze. She comes because she chooses to. I think you know her well enough to understand that she doesn't do things she hasn't chosen. Sagan was quiet for a moment. He looked at me with the complex expression of someone who knows something is true and doesn't want it to be. You're right that she doesn't, he said, which is precisely what concerns me. He stepped closer. His voice dropped. Not threatening, but private. The voice of a man who wants to be heard without being overheard. Folake has always chosen the difficult thing. She has a blind spot for what she calls authenticity. She romanticizes it. She mistakes hardship for character and simplicity for integrity. He paused. I've watched her do it her entire life. And the people she extends that trust to, the ones who seem simple and honest and uncomplicated, those are the ones who understand exactly what they have access to. I looked at him. You've described a very specific fear, I said, but you're describing it as if it's a fact about me, rather than an anxiety about a pattern you've observed in your sister. He blinked. I'm telling you, he said more quietly, that the family is watching. And that if this continues, there will be a conversation that involves more than just the two of us. There will probably be that conversation regardless, I said. Because your sister is going to make her own choices regardless. That's who she is. He looked at me for a long time. Then he picked up his car keys from where he had set them on the corner of my desk. A small gesture that was also a statement about who had the mobility in this exchange, and walked toward the workshop entrance. At the door, he stopped. I hope I'm wrong about you, he said. He didn't turn around. I hope so too, I said. He left. I stood in the workshop for a moment. Then I went back to the service bay. I did not tell Folake about the visit that day. I told her 3 days later, because she deserved to know, and because I was not the kind of man who managed information on behalf of someone else's relationships with their own family. She listened without interrupting. When I finished, she was quiet for a moment. He went to your workshop, she said. Yes. Without telling me. Yes. Another silence. Longer. What did you say to him? She asked. I told her. When I finished, she was quiet again. Then she said, with a precision that had something warm underneath it, You told him who I am. I told him what he already knew, I said. I think he needed to hear it from someone who wasn't you. She was quiet for a moment more. Dami, she said. Yes. I'm going to deal with this, she said. My way, on my timeline. I know, I said. "It may not be fast," she said, "and it may be uncomfortable before it gets better." "I've been uncomfortable before," I said. She said nothing for a moment. Then, "I know you have. That's not nothing." Folik's way and her timeline turned out to be a bored dinner. This was not what I had expected, and when she told me about it, I sat with it for a moment before I responded, because my first response was not the response I wanted to give, and I had learned, over 8 months of knowing her, that the gap between first response and considered response was where the most important decisions lived. The dinner was a quarterly board gathering for Savage Williams Capital, a tradition she had maintained for 9 years, where the 7 board members and key executives gathered for an informal dinner that served the purpose of keeping the relationship strong enough to sustain the formal meetings. It was held at her house in Victoria Island, which I had not yet been to, and it was, she said, the right context. I had asked why. She had said, "Because I am not going to introduce you to my life in a context that signals apology. A board dinner at my own house is the context in which I am most fully myself. It's the right room." I had thought about that. "Your board members," I said. "They'll have opinions." "They'll have reactions," she said. "Opinions form later." "I'm interested in the reactions." "And Segun?" "Segun is not on the board," she said. "But he will hear about it. That's also part of the point." I had understood then. This was not just an introduction. It was a statement. She was choosing the specific audience and the specific setting and the specific version of herself, the professional one, the one with authority in the room, to make clear that this was not a private matter she was managing quietly. It was a choice she was making publicly, in the space where her choices carried the most weight. It was, I thought, the most direct thing anyone had ever done for me, and it was also, I thought, the thing most likely to produce exactly the kind of reaction we were about to receive. I wore the good shirt I kept for occasions that mattered. My boots were polished. My hands were as clean as hands that work with metal can be, which is cleaner than most people expect. I drove to Victoria Island in my truck, which I parked on the street outside her gate, because I was not going to pretend I had arrived in a different vehicle. The house was what it was, large and well-designed and specific, in the way that spaces are specific when someone has built them to reflect who they actually are, rather than who they want to appear to be. There were books in the sitting room that were clearly read, not displayed. There were photographs on the wall that were personal, not professional. There was a garden at the back that was working rather than decorative, with herbs and vegetables planted in beds alongside the flowers. I noticed these things because they were consistent with everything I already knew about her. And consistency in a person is something I had learned to value more than almost anything else. The board members arrived over the course of 30 minutes. There were 7 of them, ranging from 50 to 72. A mix of men and women with the specific quality of people who had spent long enough in rooms of consequence to have developed an economy of expression. They communicated in small gestures and careful pauses, and the particular language of people who had long ago decided that excess was inefficient. Folik introduced me to each of them, not as a business associate, not with qualifications or context, or the protective framing that people use when they are presenting something they anticipate resistance to, simply as Dami, with the ease of someone who has decided that the introduction requires nothing beyond itself. Most of them responded with the professional composure of people who had been on enough boards to understand that reactions in professional settings were investments that required careful management. A woman named Mrs. Chidinma Obi, 64 years old, with the bearing of someone who had been the most significant person in most of the rooms she had entered for 40 years, shook my hand and held the handshake a moment longer than usual, looking at me with the full assessment of someone who had arrived at nothing yet, but was building towards something. A man named Mr. Babatunda Koka, 60 years old, the board's longest-serving member, shook my hand with warmth that seemed genuine, and asked me about the workshop with the specific curiosity of someone who had grown up around working people and had not forgotten that. The others were professional and pleasant and managed their reactions with the skill of people who were paid partly to manage reactions. But I felt the calibration happening. The specific, invisible recalculation that a room performs when it has received new information that requires it to adjust its model of a situation it thought it understood. The dinner itself was excellent. Folak had a cook whose jollof rice was, in my honest assessment, the best I had eaten outside of a roadside pot, which is the only category of jollof that matters. And the conversation was what board dinners are, which is to say, professional on the surface and personal just underneath, the two registers trading places every few minutes as the evening relaxed. I spoke when spoken to and listened more than I spoke, and when I spoke, I said what I actually thought, which was the only approach I knew and which seemed, from the reactions around the table, to be both expected and slightly unexpected at the same time. Mrs. Obi asked me, over the main course, what I thought was the most significant problem facing small business operators in Lagos. I said, access to patient capital and access to reliable information about regulations. Most businesses that fail in this city fail not because the operator lacks skill or work ethic, but because the environment punishes the lack of connections more than it rewards the presence of capability. She looked at me for a moment. And what is the solution? She said. More businesses like yours, I said, that are actually willing to go below the tier of companies that already have everything they need. She held my gaze. Then she picked up her fork. Interesting, she said. It was not a compliment, but it was genuine, and genuine was what I had come with. Mr. Coker asked about the vocational training program I had started 6 months ago at the workshop, which surprised me because I had not mentioned it, and Folek had not mentioned it at dinner, which meant he had done research before arriving, which told me something about the kind of board member he was. I answered him fully. He listened with the attention of someone who is tracking multiple levels of a conversation at once. The dinner ended at 10. The board members left over the course of 30 minutes, with the social grace of people who have been doing this for decades. Mrs. Obi was the last to leave. She shook Folek's hand at the door, and then she turned to me and shook mine. Mr. Adeyemi, she said, the Lagos business environment does not have enough men who say what they mean in rooms that expect them to say what is appropriate. She paused. It's a notable quality. She left. Folek and I stood at the entrance of the house and listened to her driver pull away. Then Folek looked at me. That went better than I expected, she said. Or about as expected, I said. Depending on what you expected. She looked at me. I expected them to be professional, she said. I hoped one or two would actually engage. She paused. Mrs. Obi engaged. Mrs. Obi was testing something, I said. Yes, she said. She does that. She's been on my board for 7 years, and she's tested every significant decision I've ever made. She paused. She's never found one wanting. Until now, I said. Folek looked at me directly. Until now, she hasn't found one wanting either, she said. She found you interesting. That's Mrs. Obi's version of approval. I held her gaze. I'll take it, I said. She smiled. The real one. And we stood there in the Victoria Island night, outside her house, with the city doing its warm and enormous thing all around us. And it was the most ordinary, extraordinary moment. 2 people at the end of a dinner that had mattered, still standing, still themselves. But that wasn't the worst part. The worst part was what Segun had been doing while we were at dinner, and we would find out about it in the morning. The morning brought a phone call from Folak at 7:45. Her voice was controlled in the specific way that it was controlled when something had happened that required control. The voice of someone who has received information, processed it, and is now delivering it with the precision of someone who does not want to communicate more alarm than the situation requires. "Segun called a meeting," she said. "What kind of meeting?" I said. "A board meeting," she said. "Emergency basis. He's not on the board, but he has the right as a founding family member to request an emergency session under the company's charter." A pause. "He's invoking a reputational risk clause." I sat with that. "When?" I said. "Thursday," she said. 2 days. "What's the basis of the risk claim?" She was quiet for a moment. "He's arguing that a personal relationship between the CEO and a service vendor represents a conflict of interest that was not disclosed to the board, and that the continued relationship creates ongoing reputational risk to the firm." She paused. "He's also suggesting, and this is the part that tells me he's been working on this for longer than I realized, that the fleet maintenance contract may have been awarded on the basis of personal preference rather than competitive merit." I said nothing. I thought about the contract, about the competitive tender I had won legitimately against 3 other vendors, reviewed by an independent procurement committee that had no knowledge of my existence before the process began. "I have the tender documentation," I said. "Every step of the process, the evaluation criteria, the scoring sheets, the committee's written recommendation, all of it." "I know," she said. "I have the same." "Then the contract allegation is straightforward to refute," I said. "Yes," she said. "The contract allegation is the easy part." A pause. "The harder part is the reputational risk argument, because that's not a factual claim, it's an opinion, and opinions don't get refuted with documentation." Another pause. "They get refuted with something else." "What?" I said. She was quiet for a moment. "I'm still deciding," she said. I held the phone. Outside, Surulere was doing what Surulere did in the morning. The bread sellers, the school children, the particular alive and moving energy of a neighborhood that had never needed anyone's permission to be itself. "Folake," I said. "Yes." "Whatever you decide," I said. "I want you to decide it for the right reasons, not for me. For what's true." A long silence. "I know," she said. "I mean it," I said. "If the meeting goes badly, if the board decides that the situation is one they can't support, I need you to know that I can survive that. I've survived things before." "I know you can survive it," she said. "That's not the question." "Then what is?" "The question," she said quietly, "is whether I'm willing to let the wrong people decide what the right things are for my own life." She hung up. I sat in my workshop with the morning coming through the door and the city moving around me, and the particular patience of someone who has been told to wait, and has learned, over many years, to use the waiting well. 2 days. I spent the 2 days working. Not because I was pretending the meeting wasn't happening, because work was the thing I knew how to do, and because doing it well was the only response to a situation that was outside my control that was both honest and productive. Kunle noticed something was different. He was perceptive, in the quiet way of people who have worked alongside someone for years and have calibrated their understanding of that person to a fine degree. He said nothing directly. He simply worked with the particular focused solidarity of someone who has decided that the best support they can offer is to keep doing their job well. I appreciated that more than I would have known how to say. On Wednesday evening, Folake called again. "I need to tell you something," she said. "Tell me." "I've been doing this, the company, the board, the decisions, for 25 years, she said. And in 25 years, I have never once made a significant decision because someone else's opinion of the decision was more important to me than the decision itself. She paused. "I'm not going to start now." "Folake, I'm not finished," she said. "I need you to understand what I'm going to do tomorrow, not so you can approve it, because you deserve to know what's coming." "Tell me," I said, she told me. I sat with it for a long time. Then I said, "Are you sure?" "Completely," she said. "It will be public," I said. "It can't be taken back." "I know," she said. "That's why I'm doing it." I held the phone. The Surulere night was warm and quiet around the workshop, with the city breathing steadily beyond the walls. "Then I'll be there," I said. "I know you will," she said. The boardroom of Savage Williams' Capital occupied the 14th floor of a building on Adeyemo Alakija Street, and it was everything a boardroom of that stature was designed to be. The long table of dark wood, the leather chairs, the wall of windows that looked out over the Lagos Island skyline, with the specific, beautiful indifference of a view that had been there before any of the people in the room and would be there after. I arrived at 2:50 for a 3 o'clock meeting I had not been invited to. I sat in the corridor. The laughter I had heard through the door, the laughter that opened this story, came at 3:17, 22 minutes into the session. I had been sitting in the corridor chair for 27 minutes, and the laughter was the first sound that had come through the door, clearly enough to understand. I did not know, at that moment, what had produced it. I would find out later that Segun had made a joke. He had been presenting his reputational risk argument, carefully, with the supporting documents he had prepared, with the calm authority of a man who has been thinking about a presentation for weeks and has rehearsed it until it sounds spontaneous. And at some point in the presentation, he had said something about the nature of my relationship with his sister that had produced laughter from 2 of the board members. Not cruel laughter, not deliberately vicious. The specific laughter of people who have been offered a social release valve in a tense setting and have taken it. The laughter that says, "We are on the same side of this," without anyone needing to state whose side that was. What produced the second wave of laughter, quieter, shorter, different in quality, was what Folake said immediately afterward. I did not hear the words, but I heard the room change after them. The laughter stopped. There was a silence that had a completely different texture from the laughter. Not awkward, not hostile. The specific silence of a room that has received information it was not prepared for and is now processing it in real time. I sat very still in the corridor chair. 3 minutes later, the door opened. Folake's personal assistant, a young woman named Yemi, who had been at the firm for 4 years, and who looked at this moment like someone who had been in the room for the last 3 minutes and was still processing what she had witnessed, came into the corridor and looked at me. "She's asking for you," Yemi said. I stood up. I straightened my shirt. I walked to the boardroom door. I opened it and went in. The room held 8 people, 7 board members, including Mrs. Obi and Mr. Coker, arranged around the long table in the particular configuration of people who have been in a formal session and have just received new information and have not yet rearranged themselves to reflect it. And Segun, standing at the far end of the table with a presentation folder in front of him and an expression that I recognized immediately. The expression of a man whose plan had encountered something it hadn't accounted for, and who was currently deciding whether to continue the plan or revise it. Folake was standing at the head of the table. Not sitting, standing. The posture of someone who has made a decision and is standing in it. She looked at me when I came in. She looked at the room. Then she did what she had told me she was going to do. She placed a document on the table. "This," she said, "is a letter from my personal physician. Dated 2 weeks ago, it confirms that I am 14 weeks pregnant." The room absorbed this. The specific absolute silence of people who have received information that reorganizes everything they thought they were discussing. Segun stared at the document. Mrs. Obi's expression did not change, but her posture shifted. A barely visible adjustment. The posture of someone who has been recalibrating something and has just arrived at a new position. Folake continued, "I am telling you this now, in this room, in this meeting. Because my brother has argued that my relationship with Damilola Adeyemi represents a reputational risk to this firm. She looked at Segun. I want to make clear that there is no relationship. There is a family. And I am the person who decides what that means for this company, this board, and this family. In that order. She looked at me. Dami, she said. Please sit down. I sat. The room was very still. And in that stillness, in the specific weighted silence of 14 people processing the same information from different angles, something that had been building for weeks finally arrived at the place it had been traveling toward all along. The truth. In public. In the one room where it could not be managed or postponed or quietly redirected. And it was only the beginning. The silence lasted 11 seconds. I counted them the way I counted things when I needed to stay still. Not out of anxiety, but out of the specific discipline of someone who has learned that the most dangerous moments are the ones where the impulse to speak is strongest, and the case for silence is most compelling. 11 seconds. Then Sagan said, Folake, just her name. The way you say a person's name, when you have run out of the architecture of the argument you came with and are now standing in the open space where that architecture used to be. Folake looked at her brother. She did not look angry. She did not look triumphant. She looked the way she always looked when she had made a decision and was standing in the consequences of it. Present, composed, completely herself. This is not the conversation I planned to have in this room today, she said. I plan to refute the procurement allegation with documentation and to address the reputational risk argument on its merits. She paused. But something changed in this meeting. Something that made me understand that the most direct response to what was being said in this room was the truth, the full truth, not a managed version of it. She looked at the board. I am 52 years old, she said. I have run this company for 25 years. I have made decisions in this room that cost me relationships, and cost me comfort, and cost me the approval of people whose approval I valued. And every one of those decisions was made because it was the right decision for the company and for the people who depend on it. She paused. This decision is not different. It is the same decision made with the same discipline. The only thing that is different is that this time the thing I am deciding about is mine. Mrs. Obi had been looking at the document on the table. She looked up. How long have you known? She said. 2 weeks, Folake said. And Mr. Adeyemi? 3 days, Folake said. I told him before I decided to disclose it here. He deserved to know before the room did. Mrs. Obi looked at me. I met her gaze directly. Mr. Adeyemi, she said, what do you have to say? I thought about what to say, and then I said the only thing that was true. Nothing that needs to be said in front of the board, I said. What needs to be said between Folake and me, we'll say to each other. What the board needs from me is the truth about the contract which I can provide in full, and the truth about my intentions, which are not something a document proves. They're something time proves. I paused. I'm willing to be proven. The room was quiet. Mr. Coker looked at his hands. Then he looked at Folake. The procurement allegation, he said. You have documentation. Complete documentation, Folake said. The tender process, the evaluation criteria, the committee scores, the written recommendation. The committee had no knowledge of Mr. Adeyemi prior to the process and no contact with him during it. The contract was awarded on merit. She placed a second folder on the table. All of it is here. Mr. Coker opened the folder. He read for a moment. Then he looked at Segun. Did you review this documentation before filing the request for an emergency session? He said. Segun's jaw tightened. I had access to the basic contract information. This documentation, Mr. Coker said carefully, is not the basic contract information. This is the full procurement record. He looked at the folder. The committee scores alone make the merit case conclusively. He set the folder down. Segun, did you review this? A silence. No, Segun said. The word landed in the room with the specific weight of an admission that has been extracted rather than offered. Mr. Coker nodded once. The nod of someone who has confirmed something they needed to confirm before proceeding. Mrs. Obi picked up the procurement folder. She read it with the focused attention of someone who is reading to understand, not to confirm. She turned 3 pages. She set it down. She looked at Sagan. You requested an emergency board session, she said, on the basis of a reputational risk claim that included a procurement allegation. You filed the request without reviewing the full procurement record. She paused. Is that accurate? Sagan looked at his sister, then at the board. The concern was genuine, he said. The form it took may have been... He stopped. He was a precise man, and he knew when precision was working against him. Premature, he finished. Premature, Mrs. Obi repeated. She said the word without emphasis, without irony, simply repeated it in the way that lawyers and board members repeat words when they want the room to sit inside the word and feel its full shape. The room sat inside it. Sagan was looking at the table now. Something had happened to his posture over the last 4 minutes. A subtle but visible collapse of the architecture he had arrived with, the specific deflation of someone whose plan has encountered a reality it didn't model. He was not a bad man. I had understood this about him in the workshop, the same way I had understood it about every man who had sat across from me in a similar configuration. He was a man who loved his sister and was afraid of something and had dressed the fear up as principle. The dressing was coming apart. What was underneath was simply a brother who had watched his sister build something extraordinary and had spent 25 years in the complicated emotional territory of someone who loves a person and is simultaneously diminished by the scale of what that person has become. That was the truth underneath the procurement allegation. That was the truth underneath the reputational risk argument, not malice, grief. The specific grief of someone who has watched the distance between himself and someone he loves grow wider every year and has decided, at some point he could no longer identify, that the growth of the distance was someone else's fault. I did not say any of this in the room. It was not mine to say. But I saw it. And I think, from the expression on Folaki's face as she looked at her brother across the long table, that she saw it too. She had always seen it. She had been seeing it for 25 years, and she had loved him through it anyway, with the specific, tired, patient love of a person who knows exactly what is happening and chooses to stay present to it regardless. Mrs. Obi spoke. I'm going to recommend that this board take no formal action on the reputational risk claim, she said. The procurement allegation is refuted by the documentation on the table. The personal relationship between our CEO and Mr. Adeyemi is a matter for Folak to manage as she sees fit. She has demonstrated over 25 years the judgment to make decisions that serve this company. I see no reason to apply a different standard to this decision than to any other she has made. She looked at the board. Is there any objection to that recommendation? Silence. Mr. Coker shook his head. 3 other board members made small gestures of agreement. The remaining 2 said nothing, which in a boardroom is the same as saying yes. Mrs. Obi looked at Segun. The emergency session is concluded, she said. The request is dismissed. Segun stood with the folder in his hands and the expression of someone who has arrived at an ending they did not plan for and is trying to find the correct posture for it. He looked at his sister. Folaka looked back at him. The room waited. Then Segun set the folder on the table. He walked to the door. He stopped at the door. He did not turn around. I'm sorry, Folak, he said. His voice was low, not performative, The specific low voice of someone who has run out of everything except what is actually true. Folake said nothing for a moment. Then, "I know," she said. "Come and see me on Sunday." A pause. Then he left. The door closed. The room exhaled. Mrs. Obi began gathering the documents from the table with the efficient movements of someone closing a meeting that has concluded. Mr. Coker was looking out the window at the Lagos skyline with an expression that was difficult to read and that I did not try to read. Folake looked at me. She was still standing at the head of the table, and in the boardroom light, she was exactly what she was. A woman who had just done a difficult and irreversible thing, and was still standing in the full reality of it, without retreat, without the management of expression that she brought to most professional moments. Just herself. Completely. "Are you all right?" I said. She looked at me for a moment. "Yes," she said. "Ask me again in an hour." I almost smiled. Mrs. Obi paused at the door. "Folake," she said. Folake looked at her. 9 years, Mrs. Obi said. 9 years I've been on this board. I have watched you make decisions that required more courage than most people in your position would have been willing to spend. She paused. Today is consistent. She looked at me briefly. Mr. Adeyemi, the Lagos business environment is lucky to have people who say what they mean. She left. The room was empty except for the two of us. Folake sat down. For a moment, she simply sat, with her hands flat on the table and the Lagos skyline visible behind her through the tall window. And she breathed in the way of someone who has been holding something at a specific tension for hours and has finally been allowed to release it. I sat beside her, not across the table, beside her. She looked at me. "It's done," she said. "Yes," I said. "No managing it now," she said. "No," I said. She nodded slowly. "How do you feel?" I said. She thought about it honestly. "Like I've been carrying a very heavy thing up a very long staircase," she said. "And I've finally set it down." She paused. "My legs are tired, but the thing is at the top of the stairs." I looked at her. "What do we do now?" I said. She looked at the window, at the city, at the particular, enormous, indifferent living thing that Lagos was, full of people making decisions every minute that would change their lives in ways they couldn't fully anticipate, full of people carrying heavy things up long staircases, full of people who had been spoken around as if they were furniture and who had refused to become furniture. "Now," she said, "we go and get something to eat." I laughed. She looked at me. "I'm serious," she said. "I haven't eaten since 6 this morning, and I just disclosed a pregnancy and dismissed an emergency board motion, and I am genuinely, urgently hungry." I stood up. "Kellawell," I said. She stood up. "Do not insult me," she said. "I want proper food." We left the boardroom together. Sunday came the way Sundays come in Lagos, with the particular quality of a city that has briefly reduced its volume, not to silence, but to a lower register. The churches and the families, and the specific rhythm of a day that belongs, in some irreducible way, to rest rather than production. Segun arrived at Folake's house at 11 in the morning. I was not there when he arrived. I had been there in the morning and had left by 10, because Folake had told me that the Sunday conversation with her brother was something she needed to have alone, and I had understood that without needing it explained. Some conversations belong entirely to the people having them. Mine was not a presence that would help this one. She called me at 2 in the afternoon. "He was here for 3 hours," she said. "Is he all right?" "He's better than he was on Thursday," she said. "He's worse than he'll be in 6 months." She paused. "He cried." I said nothing. "He's been carrying something for a very long time," she said. "Something about our father. About what our father expected from him and what he felt he hadn't delivered. She paused. I knew about it. I've known about it for years. But I think he needed to say it out loud to someone who would hear it as grief rather than as information. Did you hear it that way? I said. Yes, she said. I've always heard it that way. Another pause. He just needed to know that. I thought about brothers, about the specific weight of being the sibling of someone who has become something larger than the family expected, and carrying that weight in the specific direction that makes it heaviest, inward. He's going to be all right, I said. Eventually, she said. He's stubborn. He'll resist being all right for a while first. A pause. He gets it from me. I smiled. Did he say anything about... I started. About you? She said. Yes. A pause. He said he hoped he'd been wrong. That's the second time he's said that to me, I said. I know, she said. He told me. Another pause. I told him he was. I sat with that. Dami, she said. Yes. He wants to meet you properly, she said. Not the way he came to your workshop. Properly. A pause. I told him you'd decide when that happened. Next Saturday, I said. At the workshop? She said. Where else? I said. She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, with the warmth she kept for moments that mattered, where else? Sagan came to the workshop on the following Saturday. He came in a different car from the first visit, not the statement vehicle, but a practical one. The car of someone who has decided the statement is not the point of the trip. He stood at the entrance with the specific posture of a man who has prepared himself for humility and is discovering, in the preparation, that humility requires less performance than he expected. I came out from the service bay and shook his hand. His grip was different from the first visit. I showed him the workshop, not with any agenda, simply because it was what I had, and because showing people what you had, honestly, and without inflation, was the clearest language I knew. He looked at everything with the genuine attention of someone who has decided, after a long period of not trying, to try. He asked about the vocational training program. I walked him through it, the curriculum, the students, the outcomes so far. He listened in the way of someone who is building a real picture, rather than a polite one. At some point, I don't remember exactly when, somewhere between the third bay and the parts inventory, he stopped walking and stood still for a moment. My father had a small business, he said. Before Folek made her first investment, before any of this. He was looking at the tool wall. A printing shop in Mushin. He ran it for 12 years. It never became anything large. He paused. He was proud of it anyway. I said nothing. He would have liked this, Segun said. He gestured at the workshop, at the clean organization of it, at the evidence of work done consistently and honestly over many years. I looked at him. Tell me about him, I said. He looked at me. Then something loosened in his face. The specific loosening of a person who has been offered something they needed and wasn't sure they deserved to receive. He told me about his father. We stood in the workshop for 45 minutes, and he talked, and I listened, and what he said was the history of a man who had built something small and honest and had loved his children in the specific way of people who are more comfortable showing love through provision than through words, and who had died before either of them had fully understood what he was trying to show. When he finished, the workshop was quiet around us. He sounds worth knowing, I said. Segun looked at me. He was, he said. He really was. We ate at the Kellerwell cart across the road. He ate standing up, which told me he had not done this before, and found it slightly undignified, and then he ate a second serving, which told me he had found it worth the dignity. He drove back to his side of the city in the early afternoon. He did not apologize again. He did not need to. We were past the apology. We were at the part that comes after apologies, which is harder and more real and more worth something. The part where two people begin, slowly and without ceremony, to build something that can hold weight. The months that followed were not simple, and I want to be clear about that. Folake's pregnancy was monitored carefully, and there were 2 difficult weeks in the 5th month when the doctors were cautious and the nights were long, and the particular anxiety of waiting for news that you cannot hurry kept us both in a state of controlled uncertainty that required more from both of us than most of what had come before. During those 2 weeks I slept at the Victoria Island house. Not because it was decided or announced or discussed. Because one night, when the news from the doctors was neither good nor bad but was uncertain in a way that made the uncertainty the worst part, Folake had looked at me from across the kitchen counter at 10 at night and said, "I don't want to be alone tonight." And I had stayed. And I had stayed the next night. And by the 3rd night, it was simply a fact that did not require discussion. She came through the difficult period. The doctors described the outcome at the end of the 5th month as stable and encouraging. Folake received the news with the composed face and the controlled exhale of someone who had been holding a specific tension for 2 weeks and was only now allowing it to release. I was beside her when the doctor gave us the news. When we came out of the hospital into the Lagos afternoon, hot and bright and completely indifferent to what had just happened in the examination room. She stopped on the pavement and looked at the city. I stood beside her. "It's going to be all right," she said, not to me, to herself, confirming something she needed to confirm. "Yes," I said. She looked at me. "You were scared," she said. "Yes," I said. "You didn't show it." "I showed it to you," I said, privately. That's where it belonged. She looked at me for a long moment. Then she took my hand. We stood on the pavement outside the hospital with the Lagos traffic moving around us and the afternoon sun pressing down on everything and the city doing its enormous, indifferent, vital thing. And it was both ordinary and completely the opposite of ordinary, the way the most important moments always are. Mama Savage came to the workshop in the 7th month. This was not something I had been told was coming. Folake had told me her mother knew about me, had known for 3 months, and was processing the information with the specific deliberateness of a 74-year-old woman who did not rush her conclusions. She arrived on a Wednesday morning in a car driven by a young man who was clearly a nephew or cousin rather than a professional driver, and she walked through the entrance of the workshop with the unhurried pace of someone who has lived long enough to know that urgency is mostly performed. She was a small woman, fine-boned, with the kind of face that carries its age honestly rather than fighting it. The lines were there, and they told a story, and the story was worth reading. She wore a wrapper and a blouse and flat shoes, and she carried a small bag, and the expression of someone who has come with a specific purpose and intends to fulfill it. I came out of the service bay and stood before her. She looked at me, not the quick assessment of someone forming a first impression. The long, full look of someone who has been thinking about this moment and is now taking the time it requires. "Damilola," she said. "Good morning, Ma," I said. "Show me your workshop," she said. I showed her my workshop. She looked at everything. She asked Kunle what he was working on and listened to his explanation with genuine attention. She picked up the handwritten log from the office table, my father's system, the same one I had described to Folake, and held it for a moment, turning the pages slowly. "Your father made this?" she said. "Yes, Ma," I said. "I've kept it the same way." She held the log for another moment. Then she set it down carefully, the way you set down something you understand the value of. She sat in the chair across from my desk. I sat. She looked at me. "My daughter is not an easy woman," she said. "No, Ma," I said. "She has never been easy," she said. "Since she was 4 years old, she has made every decision herself, with full information, complete conviction, and absolutely no interest in anyone else's timeline." She paused. "She got it from her father. He was the same. I said nothing. She chose you, she said. Simply, as a fact, rather than an opinion. Yes, Ma, I said. With full information, she said. I believe so, Ma, I said. She looked at me for a long moment. I have one question, she said. Ask it, I said. Do you know what it means to take care of someone who doesn't think she needs taking care of? She said. Not because she's proud. Because she's spent 40 years being the one who takes care of things, and she's built her whole self around that. And she doesn't know how to receive care without feeling like receiving it means losing something. I sat with that. I know what it means, I said. Because my father was the same way. He built everything himself, and he didn't know how to let anyone help him. And it cost him. I paused. It costs people when they carry everything alone. Mama Savage looked at me. How did you help your father? She said. I didn't help him, I said. I just showed up every day at the workshop, working beside him, not helping, working. There's a difference. I paused. He could receive that. He couldn't receive help. But he could receive company. She was quiet. Then she looked at the workshop around us, at the tool wall and the log on the desk and the sounds of work coming from the bays. And she said, This is a good place. My father built it, I said. You kept it, she said. Yes, Ma. She stood. She walked to the door. At the door, she turned. Come to the house on Sunday, she said. I'll make soup. I looked at her. Thank you, Ma, I said. She left. I sat in the office for a long time after she was gone, with the sounds of the workshop around me and the specific quality of warmth that comes when something you have been uncertain about has resolved itself in a direction you had hoped for, but not assumed. I called Folak. She answered on the second ring. She came to the workshop, I said. A silence. I know, she said. She told me she was going. She didn't tell me when. A pause. What happened? She invited me to Sunday soup, I said. A longer silence. Then Folake laughed, the real laugh, surprised and complete. Sunday soup, she said. That's her highest category of approval. Is it? I said. She's only made Sunday soup for 4 people in the last 10 years, she said. Me, Segun, my cousin Tunde and the Archbishop. A pause. You're in good company. I smiled. The Archbishop, I said. He came for a church fundraiser meeting, and she decided he was worth feeding properly, she said. She has her own criteria. What are the criteria? I said. Folek was quiet for a moment. Honest work, she said, and the ability to be in a room without filling it with yourself. She paused. Those are the 2 things she looks for. Those are the only 2 things she's ever looked for. I thought about that. Did I pass? I said. Dami, she said, with the warmth she kept for the moments that mattered most. You passed before you said a word. The workshop did it for you. Our son was born on a Tuesday morning in April at a hospital on the island, in a room that smelled of antiseptic and the specific, complicated hope of places where new things begin. He weighed 3.4 kilograms and had a full head of dark hair and the expression of someone who has arrived somewhere and has not yet decided what they think of it. Folak held him against her chest and looked at him with the expression I had been waiting to see on her face since the day the doctor confirmed the pregnancy. The expression of someone who has been composed and disciplined and strategic for 52 years and has now received something that all of that composure cannot process, something that comes from a deeper place than strategy. She cried. Not dramatically. Quietly. The specific quiet tears of someone for whom crying is rare and therefore completely real. I sat beside her. I held her hand. We did not say anything for a long time. Eventually she looked at me. What do we call him? She said. I had thought about this for months. I had considered names from both our families, from the long, complicated history of where we had each come from and what we had each carried to this room. I had gone back, in the end, to something simple. Taiwo, I said. She looked at me. The first of twins, she said. But there is no second. No, I said, but the meaning stands independently, the first to taste the world. I paused. He's our first. He came first. Let him carry that. She looked at the baby. Taiwo, she said, testing it. The baby's eyes opened briefly, dark and unfocused and entirely unimpressed, as all newborns are, by the particular significance humans attach to names. Folake smiled. He has your expression, she said. My father's, I said. Same thing, she said. I looked at her. She looked at me. And between us, in the specific warmth of that hospital room, with the Lagos morning beginning to move through the window, and our son making his small, provisional sounds against his mother's chest. The particular silence of something that has arrived and is real and is ours, settled around us, like something that had been waiting a long time to land. Segun came to the hospital that afternoon. He came with flowers that were practical rather than decorative, a bunch of something from the market rather than an arrangement from a florist, which told me he had bought them himself rather than sending someone. And he stood at the door of the room for a moment before coming in. He looked at the baby. His face did something private and complex that I did not try to name. He crossed the room and stood at the side of the bed and looked at Taiwo for a long time. Then he looked at his sister. He looks like Papa, he said. Folake looked at the baby. The eyes, she said. The whole face, Segun said. His voice was very quiet. The whole face is Papa. They looked at each other. Something moved between them. Something wordless, the specific language of siblings who have shared a history so long and so deep that some parts of it exist below the reach of speech. Segun looked at me. He extended his hand. I shook it. His grip was the grip it had been at the workshop on the Saturday 3 months ago, the grip of someone who has revised something and is living in the revision. Welcome to the family, he said. He said it simply, without performance. The way you say something when you have decided, finally and completely, that it is true. Thank you, I said. He looked at the baby again. He's going to be a handful, he said. He comes from the right people for it, I said. Segun looked at me. Then he did something I had not seen from him before. He laughed. Not the social laugh, not the boardroom laugh, a real one. Short and surprised, the laugh of someone who has been offered something they were not expecting and found it genuinely funny. He stayed for an hour. When he left, he kissed his sister's forehead and looked at the baby once more, with the expression of someone doing a thing they know they will remember. At the door, he turned. Sunday soup is at Mama's this week, he said. She's expecting all of you. Folake looked at me. I looked at her. Tell her we'll be there, I said. 3 years after the boardroom meeting on Adeyemo Alakija Street, I drove the same route I had driven that Thursday, from Surulere across the bridge to the island. In the same truck, with the same engine that I had kept running for 11 years, because I understood every fault in it, and there was something in that understanding that I was not willing to trade for a newer vehicle. The city moved around me the way it always moved. The bread sellers, and the Okada riders, and the school children, and the trucks, and the noise, and the heat, and the specific, continuous, indifferent vitality of Lagos doing what Lagos does. I thought about a Thursday corridor, and a chair against a wall, and laughter moving through a closed door. I thought about a boardroom and a document placed on a table, and a room that went quiet in the way rooms go quiet when something true has arrived that the room was not prepared for. I thought about Segun at the entrance of my workshop, standing differently from the first time. I thought about Mama Savage and the handwritten log and Sunday soup. I thought about a hospital room in April, and a baby who had arrived with his great-grandfather's face and his mother's expression, and a name that meant the first to taste the world. I thought about my father, building a workshop on a street that had no name, raising a son with the specific understanding that the work was the answer to everything. Not the work as performance, not the work as ambition, but the work as the truest language available to a person who wanted to say, I am here, I am real, and the things I build do not lie. I drove across the bridge. The city opened ahead of me. I was 37 years old when they laughed in that boardroom. I was 40 years old now, and the workshop employed 21 people, and the vocational training program had graduated its 4th cohort, and the fleet maintenance contracts had grown to a scale my father would have found implausible, and which I found simply the natural result of consistent work done honestly over time. None of this had been given to me. None of it had been easy. What it had been was true, and the truth I had learned, not as an abstraction, but as a lived daily practical reality, was the only foundation worth building on. Because the rooms that laugh eventually stop laughing. And the man still standing in the corridor is the one who was building while they laughed. I pulled up to the Victoria Island house and parked on the street. Taiwo was at the gate with Folak's housekeeper, chasing the compound cat with the focused determination of a 3-year-old who has not yet been told that determination requires a plan. He saw my truck. He abandoned the cat. He ran toward the gate with his arms already open because he was 3 years old and had not yet learned to manage the expression of what he felt, which was, I thought every time I saw it, the most beautiful thing about being 3 years old. I got out of the truck. He reached me and I picked him up, and he grabbed my collar with both hands the way he always did. The possessive, unconscious grip of someone who has decided this is his person and intends to make that clear to anyone watching. I held him. The Lagos afternoon pressed warmly around us. Folak appeared at the house door. She leaned against the doorframe and looked at the two of us with the expression she had on Sunday mornings and quiet evenings, and all the ordinary moments that had accumulated over 3 years into something that was ours, specific and real and not available in any other form. He found the cat again, she said. The cat is faster, I said. He'll get faster, she said. He's very determined. He gets it from his mother, I said. She looked at me. The real smile. Come inside, she said. Mama sent soup. Taiwo loosened his grip on my collar to look at me with the specific urgency of a 3-year-old who has understood the important word in the sentence. Soup, he confirmed. Soup, I agreed. I carried him through the gate. The Lagos afternoon continued around us, indifferent and warm and full of the sounds of a city that was always, always moving. The bread sellers and the workers and the people keeping everything running in the heat and the traffic, invisible and necessary and entirely real. I was one of them. I had always been one of them. The only thing that had changed was that now the rooms that had once laughed had gone quiet. And the quiet was a different kind of sound, the sound of something that had been earned and kept. If this story moved you, if you felt every moment of Damilola's patience, Folak's courage, and the long and honest road that led from a corridor chair to a room that finally understood what it was looking at, then subscribe. Share this with someone who has ever sat outside a room that was deciding their worth. Leave a comment and tell us which moment you will carry, because the next story is already waiting. And it begins, the way all the true ones begin, with someone who has been underestimated for the very last time. Stay with us.